Hey, All Saints. It's good to be back with you. My name's Bill. I'm one of the pastors here at All Saints, and just coming off a little break, and I just want to first of all extend my thank you to Earl Krebs and Zach Jacobson, who just did a fantastic job speaking in my absence, and just really grateful for them, really grateful for their heart, really grateful for their words, and really grateful for you, All Saints. We sure miss you. We sure miss meeting together. And until things calm down, get safe, we'll continue to be meeting in this way. So I'm looking forward to this next season as we get ready to come into the Advent season and be a healing community and a community of hope. And more important than that, being a community of unity. That this season has really been one of division and, gosh, even some kind of mean and terrible behaviors that just we've all been observing. And being a church that's unified in the person and work of Jesus Christ, coming together, putting down our differences, putting down our divisions, putting down our opinions, and listening and loving and encouraging one another and our neighbors. And so that's our goal. That's our mission. That's what we need to be doing as a church community. And so I'm looking forward to that. And so today, I want to talk about our desire, our quest for certainty. And as we are at the end of this election season, we have a bunch of healing to do with each other. And so I want to just talk a little bit about our need for certainty and our temptation and our leaning towards being more foolish than wise as people. So I want to talk about that, and our text this morning is out of Psalm 14, and it goes like this: "The fool says in their heart, there is no God. They are corrupt, their deeds are vile, there is no one who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven on all people kind to see if there are any who understand, any who seek God. All have turned away, all have become corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even one. Do all these evildoers know nothing? They devour my people as though eating bread. They never call on the Lord. But there they are, overwhelmed with dread. For God is present in the company of the righteous. You evildoers frustrate the plans of the poor, but the Lord is their refuge. And then, oh, that salvation for Israel would come out of Zion. When the Lord restores his people, let Jacob and Israel be glad." So it's an interesting text, and one that will hopefully teach us a lot about being people that are wise and not foolish. And so again, in this season, we've been observing foolish and wise people, and we have two sides that are just certain that who they're voting for, who they voted for, is the right person. They're certain their understanding of the world calls for this belief system or that belief system. The scriptures tell us that we are all born with foolishness. In Proverbs it says foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, and we see that, right? If we observe any kind of little ones around us. And we also see it in us, even as adults. And so it's important that we keep this in mind as we really learn to understand what needs to happen and what we need to be doing as a community of faith in this world temperature that we have right now. So it's foolishness that destroys the sense of the reality of God. In our text, we read in verse 1 that the fool says in their heart, there is no God. When I have trouble with my doubts, is it possible that it's much deeper, much more nuanced than my intellect? Is it possible that in my heart I really don't believe God can, God will, or God does? And I think sometimes, and maybe some of us have been thinking, well, where has God showed up in this election? You know, how do we know that has God removed himself? Has God appointed somebody? I mean, these are all good questions that we need to discuss with one another and come to an understanding and pray, right? Dallas Willard observes something very interesting. He says, God responds to the heart because it is, above all, who we are, who we choose to be, and have chosen to be. God respects the centrality of our will and will not override it. On the other hand, God is sensitive to the slightest move of our heart toward Him. Doesn't matter if you're religious or not. And I think that's a real powerful thing for us to take in and consider. In other words, our heart is sensitive to God's movements around us. We are either struck by it in awe, or we doubt it and wrestle with unbelief. And a caution here is, I'll contend that a foolish heart can destroy our sense of God's reality, and I want to give you a few reasons why. And I think this is super appropriate for a church like ours, a church for all who believe, doubt, and seek, because it's really tough to be able to be certain on things. There's one thing we can be certain about, the truth of who Jesus is, but it seems like everything else, it's really hard to be able to prove this or prove that. And so we have to be open. We have to have our hearts open and listening. And that's what I want to talk about during this talk. So foolishness, what it does, it keeps us from learning. That's the one thing about our desire for certainty is I'm convinced this is the way, this is how it has to be. And that's foolish. And in that foolishness, it keeps us from learning. So our heart is the center of our will and spirit. As a human, our will can be proud and unbending, and in the political climate of division, it is a fool's errand to think that we're going to convince an already convinced person. This is why listening is the better way. I don't know about you, but any conversations I've had with people, it wasn't about me trying to convince them about my opinion or my worldview. I tried really hard to listen and understand why a person thinks the way that they do. And it didn't, whatever side or whatever thought, or I'm curious to know, how did you come to this understanding? And that's the curiosity that we need to come with. That's the kindness that we need to approach our neighbors and our family with. And I want to make a note here. I've had a few emails and a couple of texts from people really troubled about talking to their family about their belief system or their political beliefs. And I just want to say, hang in there. Avoid being superior. Avoid thinking that you know it all, no matter what side you're on. And listen. Take the better way of humility. So let's keep going. In verse 4 of our text, it basically says, fools never listen. So again, I'll keep saying it, don't be a fool. It's an important part of our understanding when the scriptures talk about foolishness. And so I'm sure all of us have observed foolishness in the season that we're in. I'm reminded of Proverbs 18:2 that says, fools find no pleasure in understanding. They find delight in airing their own opinions. And if you don't think that's true, go to Facebook. Done, right? Or don't go to Facebook, maybe. You can see, or we can observe how we all carry foolishness in our heart. When we don't care about the other, when we only care about our own understanding, we want people to know our opinion is the right one. We're just looking to be affirmed. This is the problem. And again, the scriptures show us what foolishness looks like. In Proverbs 12:2, it says, a fool hates correction. And these maybe self-diagnostic questions are helpful to assess where you're at on the foolishness level. I've had to ask myself these, and I don't want to give you the results, but let me give them to you. Why does it hurt when someone says I'm wrong? Why do I feel threatened when somebody disagrees with me? Why can't I concede defeat when I know my points are not strong or when I know I'm wrong? And this self-assessment is a really good one. It'll kind of give you what kind of work maybe you need to be doing. So the essence of foolishness is this. I don't need anyone to tell me what to do. I don't need anyone to tell me how to live my life. I can do it myself. And the assumption is people don't have anything for me to learn. I don't have to depend on anybody. I don't have to be taught. I don't want to depend on anybody, and I don't want to be taught. I know what I know. That sentiment, that way of being is out of touch with reality. If you and I are under the influence of that kind of attitude, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, we're fools, 100%. It means I'll never learn. And in Proverbs 22, it says this. It says, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. And so it reminded me of being a parent to little ones. And one of my daughters, when she was at an age where she was aware she wanted to do something, and we all could observe that she didn't know how, but she wanted to do it, used to say, "I do it." And she'd push us away, and she'd go by herself. Like when it came to tying her shoes, we wanted to show her how, but she'd observed enough and thought she could do it, and so we'd try to help her, and she'd push us away, and she'd go sit somewhere all by herself and not tie her shoes. As a parent, we're wise to realize that we're starting out with a fool, and that's not an insult, it's just the way it is. Our job is to drive that out of them. If you do poor parenting, these individuals will stay fools. Your kid will stay a fool. It's cute when they're 2. It's maddening when they never grow out of it. And there are many people, just moving along here, there are many people who don't like God because they don't like the idea of submitting to somebody who knows better. And man, I realize that is quite a statement. Why? Because, well, I want to do it myself. In Romans 1, the Apostle Paul tells us that we as human beings have always been prone to foolishness. And although we claim to be wise, we became fools. And what he's talking about is God's presence being evident in the world. We can see it, but we deny it because we don't want anyone to tell us how to live our lives. And I read this quote by a guy named Reggie McNeil, and he was talking about the crisis that the church is in America right now. And the thing that he said I thought was very, very fascinating was this, that the church isn't spiritual enough to be the church in the world that it's in. And I think that's because individualism has crept in, and I know how to do this, and I don't need anybody to tell me how to live my life. I don't need to obey God in all of these things. I'll obey God in some things. And that's not what the scriptures tell us. The scripture says, obey God and trust him. Not with what you agree with, not with what you don't agree with, but trust him and obey him. And so when we approach life humbly, we can realize that it's really hard to prove many things. Like, for instance, I can't prove the existence of God. I see the effects of God, but I can't prove the existence of God. I see evidence, for instance, that my wife loves me, but I can't prove it. The fact of the matter is everything we think we know is statistically very probable. So we trust the evidence and then we come to know it, but there's always a chance it isn't certain. Take that in for a minute. Think about that. It's humbling. We're in this whole science, trust science, trust science. Yes, there's things about science that we should look at and embrace and say, yes, these things are helping us correct a course or determine what action we take, but science isn't the answer. It really comes down to this understanding of who God is and God's presence in my life, and do I trust him, and does that presence direct me and guide me? So in the world, when we look at the intricacies of design, they're everywhere. When we were in Arizona, the night sky is remarkable. There's no light pollution. You can see, oh my gosh, stars, planets. It was just unbelievable. We were fascinated by, we'd go out and look at the sky every night. And we had to spend some time learning because we were so fascinated about the moon and the stars and the way the planets orbit around the sun. There's an order that is evident in the galaxy. How the moon came up, how the stars and planets were placed in the sky. There is this amazing sense of order in the galaxy. And therefore, the chances of it all happening by accident are remarkably doubtful. Why would we put any amount of certainty on that slim probability? And I think that's something that we have to take in as people in the world, in the life that we live, that we can't look at the world and say, I am only certain, I can only be certain, I can't have any doubts. No, I love Jude 22. Have mercy on those who doubt. And that's for all of us. We can't be sure, but we can be sure, if you know what I mean. 2, foolishness makes it difficult to see my own bias. So foolishness prevents me from learning, and foolishness makes it difficult to see my own bias. We tend to blame our unbelief, our doubt, and our difficulties about God on our intellect or emotions. That's an excuse. The problem is, it's in our heart. We can point to a belief in something else, something that seems or feels more solid than God. We can't doubt everything at once. We can't doubt things about God without believing in our own reason. You can't be skeptical without putting faith in something else. Foolishness won't admit that I have already put my faith in something else. I can't admit my own bias. Think about this. If you can't believe something about God, it could be that God is already threatening something that you already have faith in. So what are the things that you're having trouble believing in about God? And then what's the counter? Why? Is it really you just can't figure it out? Or is there something in your heart that doesn't want to believe it or won't let you believe it? That's a self-analysis. That's a search for faith. That's why we need each other, because these kinds of conversations are so important to belief and understanding, and then living these beliefs out in the world to care for people and to love our neighbor and to love God. N.T. Wright, this I thought was fascinating. Might not be so much for you, but I included it in my sermon today. He says this: I have taken it for granted that Jesus of Nazareth existed. Some writers feel a need to justify this assumption at length against people who try from time to time to deny it. It would be easier, frankly, to believe that Tiberius Caesar, Jesus' contemporary, was a figment of the imagination than to believe that there never was such a person as Jesus. And so what he's saying here is there's no way to doubt God without putting a major emphasis on what you believe about God. Only a fool says, "You have faith, I don't." If you doubt belief in God, it's probably because you have belief in something else that is much stronger. So admit it, explore it, look into it. I say this because we have to examine what we place weight on. It will also put limitations and questions on my obedience to God. The crux of belief is to trust and obey, to believe what is unseen. It is trust. It's a trust move that God will address my anxieties and fears. Examine the very commitments that are in the heart of your doubts. Again, because we hold to the belief that doubt is part of faith. We also want to doubt our doubts. A fool accepts their own bias. A person of faith is willing to analyze their doubts. 3, finally, foolishness can't understand grace. Verse 7 of our text says, "Oh, that salvation for Israel would come out of Zion." What is Zion? Well, it's a place in the Matrix. Well, hold on. It's a name of one of the hills in Jerusalem. It's the hill where the temple was built. And the psalmist is saying God's rescue plan will come out of the temple. The temple is the place where God dwells. It was at the temple where God's glory was available and not threatening. Foolishness is that part of our heart that is threatened by God. We don't like people to tell us what to do. I do it. We don't need people to help. When we get near to God, we begin to feel threatened. Foolishness tells us that we are getting close to somebody who's going to ask us to obey, to trust, to put our hope in. And it's frustrating that churches have been trying to tell you and me how to live. I don't know about you, but I always walk away feeling guilty because I don't want to be told how to live my life according to somebody in my position telling you how to live your life. I feel guilty about it. I'm not doing enough. I'm not performing well. So the truth is, it's God who's telling us to obey and submit and do what we are told, and our heart hates that. We try to accept some of it, and we reject some of it also. I don't want to obey. We can say we go out in nature and get near to God, look at the stars, look at the alpine lake, look at the peaceful desert. That's where I get close to God. Well, that might be true, and it might be good, but it's also something that doesn't really bring us to that place of obedience. So the scriptures say this: you still have to go to the temple. Sure, all those places are lovely. It's beautiful to be out in the desert and at an alpine lake. I see beautiful pictures on Instagram of your explorations, and there are beautiful places, and I'm sure it feels like God's so much more present there than God would be here in the city. But we still have to go to the temple. And in the temple, I can accept you, says God, even with all of your foolishness. Why? Because Jesus said something so significant and powerful. He said this, I am the temple. I have made a way for you to be forgiven and a pathway for you to gain wisdom. And therefore, you don't have to be threatened. And when you go to your neighbor and they have an opinion or they have a belief system that's completely different than yours, and they might even like yours, you can still be a person of love and kindness and respect and listen and love and not try to convince them. Just be present. The Apostle Paul says the cross is foolishness to us. Why? Well, God, I don't need your charity. I don't need anybody's charity. I'll do it. I'll read books. I'll meditate. I'll focus. I'll set my will. I'm smart. I'm kind. I'm good. That's foolish talk. And a person who lives like that doesn't understand grace. Because guess what? I can't read enough. I can't meditate enough. I can't pray enough. I don't have the ability to gain more wisdom than what my brain capacity is. There's people way smarter than me that have a capacity to understand concepts and things that I don't and I can't. So we have to put ourselves in this position. And Jesus calls us to the lower position, to the last of the line, not being superior. I get tired, too, of hearing people talk about how, well, you know what, now that this president's gone, the new president's coming in, we need to be more this and that. Well, that's a position of superiority. As the church, what we need to be is humble, kind listeners, unifiers, and realize that there's foolishness in our own heart that we need to be driving out by the grace and love of God to be able to give away love and kindness to people that don't think like us or don't even like us. That's what's at stake here. A Christ follower is someone who knows they're a fool. A fool doesn't know they are a fool. So we are all foolish, and the only way to shake off our foolishness is to accept what Jesus has done for us and realize our worth and value because of that. It was Jesus that wanted to go to the cross for you and me. Why? Because he saw us, in spite of our foolishness, as beautiful and lovable and good, and he wanted us. Therefore, when we understand that, we will accept the worth and value of those who don't agree with you or like you. And I think that's what is needed from the church in America, from All Saints Church here on Queen Anne in Seattle, that we go out and love people, that we go and listen to people, that we be unifiers. And that's our theme for Advent this season, is unity. That we have to be unified here. And there are plenty of people that attend here that don't agree politically, maybe even spiritually, or even the way they practice their belief. But that's what makes the church so beautiful, because we are this conglomeration of all these different kinds of ways, and we come together. Why? For one reason. We gather around for one purpose, and we are here to worship one person, and that's Jesus Christ. That unifies us. So let's not be fools. And our quest for certainty, let it be for the right things. I'm certain Jesus loves me, and I'm certain Jesus loves you. Next week, we're going to continue this series, and we're going to talk about anxiety. Maybe we should have done that this week, but we're going to be in Psalm 27, and we're going to talk about anxiety. And because, these are issues that we're facing in this modern world, and the scriptures have tons to say to us about these things. So, I hope that you'll join us on Wednesdays to pray, to gather and talk about the scriptures. It's such a great way for us to connect. And so, we just love to see our meeting together in that way, just populated with all of you. I haven't seen faces and miss all of you so much. And we look forward to being with you. We have some good things planned for Christmas Eve. We're going to have a really cool gathering that we're putting together, not in person, but something that will be something that you can have a worship experience and a Christmas Eve experience in your home. And so we love you, we miss you, and thank you so much for today, and look forward to chatting with you next week. See ya.